Shalom, everyone, and wishing everyone a Chag Pesach Kasher V'Sameach, a very happy and kosher Pesach. And speaking of kosher, if you haven't yet sold your chametz, it's not too late. Remember to stuff them away somewhere and cover it up, and we'll sell it off for you next Monday. And then it's time for the Seder, everyone, as if all the cleaning that you're all doing in the meantime is not happening. Yes, I'll skip right into the Seder. The important part, what do we need? And, ma nishtana hashana hazot. How is this year different than other years in having your Pesach Seder? Well, we're still going to use the Haggadah that we use every year. But it's not every year. Every year has its own challenges. It has its own set, its own background, backdrop of what's happening in the world, and its own context. So the question that I brought up on Shabbat, and I want to talk about for a couple minutes today, is how do we have a Seder in light of And how do we do it this year in light of everything that's going on in Israel and the anti-Semitism that's spread around the Jewish world? And how do we talk about these things at the Seder? How do we make sure fights don't break out about politics? And how do we frame all of these things within the context of the Passover story, and of course, in a way that's appropriate to children who might be at your Seder? Well, this is a very big question, and we spoke about it on Shabbat. I'm going to attach a couple of supplements, one which is you could hand out if you wanted to use it or part of it at your Seder, that talks about bringing home the hostages to your Seder, as well as there's a leader's supplement, which you can download from the same page that we're going to link you to. And I think this could be helpful, whether you decide to use it throughout the Seder, whether you decide to look at it before and bring in a couple of things. It's something that you could do to talk about what's happening, and particularly the hostages, which are in all of our hearts. But let me back up a minute and just say something about dealing with this, what's happening, and dealing with it within the context of the Seder. Maybe one of the only times you really get together with close family and friends, at that, large of a group meeting, perhaps all year long. So it's a very special time. It's a very special context. And the first thing that I would sort of ask yourself is, what do I want the boundaries to be at my Seder? Some people might say, I don't want to talk about this at all. Some people might say, I'd like to have my whole Seder sort of have this woven in, the hostages and the return of hostages, into the discussions, into the ceremonies of the day. And so people are going to have different ways, but ask yourself what you want your boundaries to be. And set those boundaries when you introduce the Seder to guests who might not even have ever been to one before. Maybe there'll be some people like that at your Seder. Say a few words about what's going to happen and sort of set some boundaries around what is appropriate during a time like this and what is not appropriate. So, for example, you might say, discussions or heated arguments about politics actually are not really going to be appropriate to the kind of tone and Seder and sanctity that we're looking to have here tonight. You could say something like that and be perfectly appropriate to do so. Also, being intentional and using something like the supplement would be very good. And lastly, think about some of the great themes of Pesach and the Haggadah that are appropriate. So, for example, redemption. God redeems the people from Egypt. And of course, as we read in the Haggadah, B'chol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. In every generation, we need to look at ourselves as though we went forth from Egypt. In what way are we going forth from Egypt this year? Mitzrayim comes from Meitzar, a place of narrowness. And so, coming out of Egypt, in each generation, we face our own narrowness. We face our own winter. And of course, Pesach is Chag HaAviv. It is the holiday of spring. So if we're in winter right now, we feel that things are really tough, and they are. We remember that in Judaism, we stress the hope, we stress the optimism that after the winter comes the spring. And how do we help bring it, right? How do we plant those seeds? Someone said to me, maybe when talking about the 4 children this year, talk about how we would talk to different people, Jewish or not, about what's happening in Israel and about anti-Semitism. How do we approach these things? Each person according to the way in which they ask their question. So when thinking about Pesach this year, think intentionally about your Seder, how to handle things that might happen, how to set boundaries and bring these issues in ways that are age appropriate and also appropriate to the sacred nature of the Passover Seder, with themes like redemption and coming out of winter and eventually moving into spring, Chag Aviv, and of course, me'afela le'ora, from darkness to light. Our foundational story is that 400 years of slavery won't hold us down, nor will the very difficult challenges we have today. Chag Pesach Sameach and Shabbat Shalom.